Hi, you're very welcome to this presentation on the Tribes of Ammonia YDNA project. I'm Pat Clennan. I'm administrator of the project along with Dave Cushing, Martin Curley and Jim Halloran. This talk was given as part of National Heritage Week in 2024 to launch a project in both Athleague in County Roscommon and Ballinasloe, County Galway, either end of the medieval territory of Ammonia or High Manny as it's often anglicized. You'll see on the project map here, at its great extent, the territory extended across South Roscommon, East Galway, took in several parishes on the Clare border, and also extended across the Shannon into Lusmagh parish in County Offaly. So the project is going to explore the genetic heritage of this region in order to better understand the origins and history of the surnames that emerged from the tribes of Ammonia and also those that migrated into the territory over the centuries. So those with ancestry in the region will undoubtedly identify several surnames on the map that feature in their ancestry, in their family trees. So the project will hopefully give you insights into the history and origins of these surnames, but it'll also help us to identify the connections between the different surnames and which have joint origins in the clan era, and also give us a kind of shine a little bit of light on the history of Ammonia, hopefully as well. This is the project homepage. The project is hosted by Family Tree DNA, which has around 12,000 surname, geographic, and haplogroup projects on the site. We'd encourage any members who do decide to join the project to also join their own surname projects, which do incredible work to help people understand the different lineages of the surname. This project is going to be a geographic project though, and it's going to be designed to act as something of an umbrella to bring all the different lineages associated with this particular region together, help both testers and administrators to work together to enhance their understanding of the ancestry of the region. So as such, the project is going to be open to anyone who bears a surname documented to belong to the tribes or the territory of Ammonia, or anyone that has a confirmed earliest known patrilineal, so that's your YDNA or your surname line ancestor from this region. To join the project, you just need to manage or purchase a YDNA kit for a tester, as listed above. So, of course, females are very welcome to join the project, but because YDNA is only carried by males, you will need to find a male tester for that surname line that you want to explore, just so they can do the test. And this will give you access to all the analytical tools on the site, comparison tables within the project, and access to the expertise of the project administrators who do everything they can to help you understand your results and to learn more about your ancestry. The presentation is broken into two parts then. So this recording is the first part, and I'll briefly introduce you to YDNA and how we use it to research deep ancestry and our surname history. I'll use three examples to illustrate this. I'll also give an overview of the Greater Ammonia and its constituent tribes. As the project progresses and grows, future presentations will focus on different tribes and surnames to explore what we're learning about them. But in this particular presentation, I'm going to focus on the origin legends of three of the tribes and how the DNA stacks up against these legends and the genealogies that are recorded. So we'll look at the Kelly descendants of Monia Moore, we'll look at the Maddens and the Coolins of Sealanamka or South Ammonia, and we'll look at a genetic group that features the Manions and the Wards of the Sogan tribe. As I said, the project is going to use YDNA, which is inherited down the male line or the surname line. A more popular type of DNA is autosomal DNA, which is done by Ancestry.com, MyHeritage, and others. And this looks at the DNA of all your ancestral lines. So this is good at identifying cousins and researching your ancestry back about 5 or 6 generations, but it doesn't really go any further. So if you want to get back beyond kind of the reach of autosomal DNA and back beyond the kind of brick wall of when records dry up in the early 1800s, then we can use Y-DNA, which is passed down from father to son, generation after generation, almost completely unchanged, all the way back to the first modern humans about 200,000 years ago. Now we're not going to be going back that far, but we're going to be focused on the surname era and before that the clan era. So I often get asked by females why we don't include female DNA. So mitochondrial DNA is a third type of DNA, and that's passed down the mother's mother line. Mitochondrial DNA is more difficult to use for two reasons. Number one, it mutates at a slower rate, so you don't get the same definition in the branching. And secondly, because the surname changes every generation, it's quite hard to use genealogically. Whereas on the other hand, Y-DNA, there's several advantages to that. Number one is mutates at a more regular rate and quite predictable rate, which allows us both to kind of define different branches of a lineage and also to date those branches. And secondly, we have the surname, which is also passed down the male line, and this kind of acts as an anchor for us. DNA doesn't really tell us anything on its own. We need something to kind of cross-reference with it. Now, I won't go into the science of it in too much depth, but very briefly, there are two types of mutation or changes in Y-DNA, and these give us the DNA markers that we use to group people. So first, you can see in this diagram an SNP or a SNP marker. So our DNA is basically represented as a string of letters. A SNP is a single point mutation, so where one of these letters changes. Here it changes from an A in the ancestor to a T in the tester, so male 1. And this is quite a reliable, stable marker which once it changes, it'll never change back. The second kind of marker then is called an SDR, or short tandem repeat. And this is a repeating pattern in the sequence of DNA. For instance, in a diagram, male 1 has 5 repeats of pattern CTA, 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 so 5 times. Male 2 has 6 repeats, male 3 has 7 repeats. So this again allows us to identify different genetic groups according to the tester's values at a particular location on their DNA. So both markers have advantages and drawbacks. SNPs are very stable and reliable, but they are more expensive to test. SDRs, on the other hand, they're cheaper to test, but they mutate back and forth. When you look at them over an extended period of time, they can mutate back and forth. So they're not always as reliable. But when you do your initial test, if you join the project, we'd advise a Y37. So we look at 37 markers. And you'll be testing this type of SDR marker, and that'll allow you to be grouped more generally, and then we can advise you from there. So this is the first thing that we'll do in the project. We'll put testers in their relevant groupings. We look at the tester's SDR values, compare them against all the other members of the project, and I'll create these genetic groupings. Here I've just highlighted 2 sets of SDR markers in the red boxes, just to show how these are relatively unique to the Glennon testers in the group. And so these would help us to distinguish them and put them in a group together. Now, if the tester has done an advanced DNA test, so an SNP test, we'll also get a more specific haplogroup. So there's a column here with haplogroups, and that's basically a reference number of your location on the human DNA family tree. And that's obviously going to be a lot more accurate, giving us the exact the particular branch or even the leaf of the human DNA family tree that the tester sits on. But as we start out in the group, the groupings are going to be relatively broad. But as we progress and grow the group, then they'll become more and more refined. This is going to be the last sciencey bit. So to get those haplogroups I mentioned, you have to do an advanced test. So with family tree DNA, this is called a big Y700. And this is SNP testing. So when a SNP mutation happens, it basically creates a new branch on the DNA family tree. So here in the diagram, as we've seen before, the ancestors who were all had A value at this point. In man 1, it changes to a T, and all the descendants of that lineage then will continue with the T mutation. And this allows us to distinguish that all those descendants from the other branches of the family. So the others are going to just continue on as before until, again, as we see in the third branch, in man 3 here, his great-grandson has another mutation. So the first G changes to a C, and again, this creates a new genetic branch of this family. But not only does this allow us to map out the branches of the family, with enough testers, it also allows us to date the branching points. And because Y DNA mutates at a relatively predictable rate, so if we have enough testers and data, we can calculate the date the branch occurs, which is really helpful genealogically, particularly if we have a pedigree to compare against or a historical event. All this allows us to identify different branches of humanity and roughly when they branched off from one another. Now this is a diagram from Tibor Fair, a genetic genealogy researcher, where he outlines the genetic relationship between the various Irish tribes. But the majority of the research into the various tribes has been spearheaded by amateur genetic genealogists. So for instance, CTS 4466 has been identified as associated with the Eonacht of South Munster. Dennis Wright has been the person who identified L226 has been a signature marker for the Dalcash, but also the Argala. So another DNA signature has been identified for the Argala, who supposedly are the ancestors of the Ammonia. But again are on a separate branch of the DNA tree. So all this kind of allows us to understand better the relationship between the different tribes. And in the bottom right hand corner you can see that the Ammonia and the Connacht, so M222, that was originally associated with 9 of the 9 hostages, but now is more broadly associated with the Connacht. And under the Connacht came the Ineal of the north of Ireland, and then also the Eberune. So the O'Connors, McDermotts, Rileys, Rourkes, Flahertys, all those other families associated with the O'Connors, Kings of Connacht. And then beside them, we've got DNA marker FGC 6550, which is the overarching DNA marker for the Ammonia, the Kellys, and the Trainers, who are more associated with Argala, and which may be identify the reason that they're associated with the Argala. But we'll talk about that a little more later. But when we compare the Ammonia against all the tribes, then the more closest related are the Connacht, which kind of makes sense. And it's worth noting that this DNA marker associated with the Ammonia is identified first by the testing of the Kellys, so extensive testing of the Kellys, who have quite a large DNA project, and also it's confirmed with a confirmed pedigree from the current Count O'Kelly. Here, Tibor Fair maps out the genetic signatures on the ground to help us better understand the territories. Now, this is very broad brush strokes, as it only shows the genetic signatures of the chiefly clans in the territories. But it does identify the Ammonia in light blue in the centre, so it's using the O'Kelly DNA marker that we've just mentioned. But also along the western and the northern border of Ammonia in blue, we've got the orange of the Connacht there, more specifically the Brune, so the O'Connors, McDermotts and co. So which is insightful in itself, and obviously has an impact on the makeup of the genetic signatures within Ammonia itself. But as I said, this is broad brush strokes, and what the Tribes of Ammonia project aims to do is to refine this and include all the diverse tribes that made up the Kingdom of Ammonia. Now, DNA is of little use on its own, so we need to put it in context, and we need to have something to compare against. Students of Ammonia are quite lucky in that we've a wealth of sources like the Lauriwania, the Book of Lecan, which contain quite a bit of genealogical material about the tribes of Ammonia. So here we have an overarching pedigree constructed by Donald Burke based on these medieval genealogies, and Donald's website is a great resource for and an accessible history for the region. Here Donald highlights several of the surnames identified to descend from some of those ancestors within the genealogies of Ammonia. An early branch in the top left corner you can see were descendants of Ammonia Moore's grandson, Fiachra Fionn, so the Noctons and the Lallies of Ui Maine, just south of Lochray. And then in the centre you've got Clancuffin, and down the right hand corner you've got Owen Fionn and Owen Buach. Owen Fionn is said to have given rise to the Kellys, Joes, Egans and Donlans, while Owen Buach is said to have given rise to the Sealanamkil. So that included the Maddens and the Coolahans, Winter Lorcan, Winter Tracy, which is often taken to be Larkin and Tracy, but realistically, if it has an O or a Mac before it, it's generally a surname. But with Winter or Kennel or Clan, then it's generally a clan name, which is often confused. But of course, this is just a portion of the genealogies. The project will look at these and alternative genealogies in order to compare them against the Y-DNA and see what it says about the ammonia. Now, before we start looking at various tribes, I want to just cover one more very important topic, and that's surname DNA switches. So over the 1,000 or so years since the dawn of the surname era, there are inevitably going to be occasions where the Y-DNA is not passed down along the surname line as you'd expect. So there are numerous reasons for this, and probably the least likely is infidelity in rural Catholic Ireland. So there are several other mechanisms that this can happen. So for example, fosterage was particularly prominent in Gaelic custom. Legends and annals are replete with examples of children being fostered either by Breton families for education, by rival clans to cement alliances. But how often they ended up adopting a surname isn't clear, but it's likely to be quite a regular occurrence. Obviously, there's other reasons too, like our ancestors went through some very hard times, and when parents didn't make it through, neighbours or in-laws would be called upon to adopt, with the child often taking up a new surname. A family might switch clan allegiance for whatever reason, maybe protection, and then out of respect adopt a new surname. A son-in-law might be required to adopt his new wife's maiden name in order to inherit the family land. But there are an infinite number of reasons how the transmission of Y-DNA can be disrupted and switched with the surname. But there mightn't have been a switch at all, so we know that there's many surnames have several distinct septs with complete separate origins in different regions of the country. For example, the Glennon project has identified at least 4 separate, distinct Glennon septs. So there's Roscommon, Galway, there's 2 in Westmeath, another in Kilkenny, and then McGlennons in Northern Ireland as well. Okay, let's look at the tribes of Ammonia then. So, but in order to understand Ammonia, you need to understand the broader kind of landscape. Ireland at the dawn of the surname era was a very hierarchical and a decentralized country. There were layer upon layer of nominal, if not effective, government. So at the very top you had the High King of Ireland, and then below that you had the provincial kings. So above the Ammonia was the King of Connacht, which was the O'Connors from the dawn of the surname era right through to the arrival of the Normans. And then you have below the provincial kings you had Ammonia. So we call this Greater Ammonia. which was again in turn broken down into North Ammonia under the leadership of the Achilles, and South Ammonia, or Sealanamca, which is under leadership of the Coolans and then the Maddens. And then again, in turn, we can break this down further. And these were constituted of several petty kingdoms or local tribal territories. So, for instance, South Ammonia or Sealanamca was broken down into Sealanamca itself, which is basically the modern barony of Longford. You had Lusmagh parish in Offaly, Winterkinney or Moycarn, the southern tip of Roscommon, and then just above that, Moyfin or Top McConnell. So this all made up the territory of Sealanamca or South Ammonia. And this was ruled over by the Maddens for the majority of the medieval period. And then North Ammonia was at its core. You had Ammonia under the leadership of the Achilles, and that is basically the modern barony of Kilconnell. And then south to that, you had Ui Maine, Kinelfeckin, so which ran from Loughrea all the way down to those Clare border parishes. So this was under the leadership of the Noctons and the Lallies originally, but eventually they were pushed out. The Lallies moving north towards Tuam and the Noctons moving over to Nafea, or the Fays of Athlone. Then above Ammonia we had the Sogan, so the old ancient tribes of the Sogan of this territory. Originally their territory had extended all the way from the Clare River all the way over to the Suck, but over time all the tribes surrounding kind of encroached on their territory and pushed them back. So ultimately they were based around Moyla, Kilscobe and Knockmoy. And then right beside that you've got Cruffin, which is another territory we ran from Mount Mary basically down to around Haskra. And then along the northern border you have Corcamoga, Clan Conway, Tirmonia and Clonuddock, and these were all on the O'Connor borders, the Ibroon. So you see a lot of Ibroon surnames migrating into the territory of Oanya from the north and the west. Now in the early days of Imonia, the early references in the annals suggest that the heart of Imonia was originally further north in Tirmonia. So Daniel Curley has a book soon to be released, to be published, covers the archaeology of the Imonia over the centuries. So they're originally power base around Lough Crone, right at the centre of Tirmonia, from around the 8th century. But as the O'Connors grew in power, they were pushed south. So ultimately, the leaders of Imonia, and particularly the O'Kellys in the later stages, established a power base around Lough Callow, near Kilconnell, so from the mid-13th century onwards. Now, although this kind of changed over time, at dawn of the surname era, these constituent petty kingdoms were relatively autonomous, and in particularly the Sealanamca, the South Ammonia. The references in annals suggest that they were relatively autonomous for the rest of Ammonia for much of the medieval and early modern period. But let's then look at what the DNA can tell us about all these different tribes and their origins. Let's take a look then at the O'Kellys. So the Achilles became the dominant power in the kingship of the Greater Imonia. Aside from an exchange with the Sealanamca, the Maddens in the 11th century, the Achilles kind of sort of dominated the kingship of Imonia throughout the medieval period. The Achilles were given to be the descendants of Imonia More, after whom the kingdom is named. So Imonia More was a member of the Argala, a kingdom in modern-day Armagh and Monaghan in the northeast of Ireland. And the story goes that Monimore camped Connacht to find land for his people, where he was confronted by Keen, the king of the Fair Bulg or Shincanal, which was the ancient tribe of the region, and it's often associated with the Sogan, also considered an ancient tribe. Now when Keen met Monimore on the battlefield, Keen had a much larger army, but St. Graelin, a holy man of the region, intervened, causing the ground around Keane's army to turn to marsh and swallow his army, thus giving Moinmore a God-given victory. And from that point on, the Ammonia always carried the image of St. Graelin's crozier, so his bishop's staff, on their war banners. A second origin story comes at the dawn of the surname era when Tig O'Kelly, who was fighting alongside Brian Boru at the Battle of Clontarf. So when he was killed, the legend goes that an infield, so a mythical beast combining a fox, eagle, and wolf, emerged from the Irish Sea onto the beach at Clontarf to protect Tig's dead body from being defiled by the Vikings. And this is why the emblem of the infield still features on the top of the Kelly coat of arms today. So the Kellys were great at promoting this image of kingship and of tradition, and they were great patrons of Gaelic culture and literature. Much of this is encapsulated in the Laura Iwanya, the Book of Ammonia, and that contains many of the origin legends and many of the genealogies, medieval tracts that we'll refer to during the project. And in the background of this slide, there's a fold-out pedigree of the Ammonia from John O'Donovan's Tribes and Customs of Ammonia. And it's an incredible pedigree that goes from Moinmore all the way down to many of the 18th century and 19th century O'Kellys. And indeed, the current Count O'Kelly can tie into this genealogy too. So let's then take a look at the Y-DNA, compare the Y-DNA, the genealogies, and all these origins, legends, and see what they say about it. I mentioned at the start how surname projects have been so important to developing our understanding of the ancestry of the different surnames. Well, the Kelly surname project is one of the best developed projects on FTDNA. And the Ammonia subgroup in particular is now being refined by the project, and they're beginning to identify specific ancestral lineages so that current day testers can identify their specific ancestors. So here we have the first half of the FTDNA time tree for the Kellys, which basically outlines the branching structure of the genetic group. The common ancestor of them all is the BY3437, so it's estimated to have been alive in 1149 AD, which is in the right era for Donal Moore, who died in about 1224 AD. And you can see several surname switches here for a myriad of reasons that we probably explained earlier. But near the top you have the Kyo's. Now this wasn't a surname switch, but an adoption of a new surname by a cadet branch of the O'Kellys, and they became later chiefs of Top McConnell. Further down then you can see a branch that immigrated to Scotland and adopted the surname Small, probably a nickname that was adopted. And then you've other surnames mixed in, like Green, which is often an anglicization of Fahy name. But we can be certain that all these Kellys, are Kelly branches, because the name features on these diverse branches. So if we triangulate back along the branches, we can see that there's Kellys featuring on all these branches. So the chances of that happening are next to none. So we have to say that given that Kellys are on all these branches, when we trace it back, this had to be a Kelly or Kelly. And the group continues for another 5 lineages, all again featuring Kellys along each branch. But there are also a Madden branch here. So in this, the connection with the Maddens of Silanum Kada. So is it? Well, the genealogy is placed a common ancestor for the O'Kellys and the O'Maddens as the 17th century, so long before the O'Kellys had adopted the surname. For this group, the common ancestor for the Maddens and the Kellys is around 1350 AD. So if we triangulate all the adjacent branches, we can see that they're all Kellys again. So we have to deduce that this was originally a Kelly branch, with this branch adopting the Madden name at some point between around 1400 and 1800 AD. And if you go further down, we can see that a lineage of William Ui O'Kelly has also been identified, and it's from this line that the current Count O'Kelly descends. Now the size, diversity and branching, as well as the locations and the date estimates, and the Count's pedigree, all confirm that this is indeed the Ammonia Kelly haplogroup, at least from the 12th century, you can be certain of that. But can we go back any further and confirm them to be the descendants of Monia-Moore? Well, let's take a look then. If we zoom out and take a look at the branch adjacent to the Kellys, we see that it's a consolidated group of trainers. So what's the relationship between the Kellys and the trainers? Well, from the time tree, it appears as though the branching point between the two is just before 400 AD. But you have to understand that the time tree is designed to help you visualize the branching, but it's not so good for dating branches. So in fact, the trainers and the Kellys have an accumulation of approximately 29 mutations all the way along this line, which in common with one another. So the actual branching point is closer to the 9th century around here, which is much later than we would expect from the genealogies and the fact that the trainers are associated with the Argiala and the Kellys with the Ammonia. But if we look at the location of Argiala, the kingdom from which Monia-Moore is supposed to have come, it covers modern-day Armagh and Monaghan. And if we look at Barry Griffin's 1901 surname distribution maps, we see that the trainers are indeed concentrated around this region. But are the branch adjacent to the Kellys on the DNA tree, are they from this region? Well, yes, they are. So this is a website called Genetic Homeland. So it basically maps all those advanced DNA results where testers recorded the earliest known ancestor location and made the anonymized results public. So they put all this on a map, and almost all the advanced testers from the trainer group are within the territory of Argiala. You see there. And while the O'Kellys are either concentrated around Ballinasloe, a large cluster here, or else all around Connacht. So they've kind of spanned out over time, but we know that they're genetically all related to one another. They're all Kellys or associated surnames. So there's undoubtedly a relationship between the Ammonia O'Kellys and the territory of Argiala, but the branching point, as we said, appears to be much later. Now this could be an anomaly in the DNA, or it could be that the relationship with the Argiala was much later, and that the association with a tribe from Argiala was played upon in the medieval text in order to heighten the prestige of the Ammonia. But it seems to have been quite popular in the high medieval period to claim descent from a northern tribe. But either way, the association with Argiala does tend to lend credibility again to this haplogroup being descendants of Monia-Moore. The second tribe we're going to look at then are the Sogan, who were said to be an ancient tribe descended from the Crutes and their Picts, the first wave of Celtic people to populate Ireland, and were present in the church before the arrival of the Ammonia. So they're often associated with the Firbolg or the Shankinnell, those who fought Ammonia when they first arrived in this region. Now, the fact that they're never really integrated into the genealogies of Ammonia tends to kind of lend credence to this as well. But later, they became very much integrated into the Kingdom of Ammonia and were considered the crack troops for the kingdom. Several surnames are recorded as being eligible for the chieftainship of the Sogan. So Mannion, Ward, Lennon, Scarry are all recognisable names of the region today, but then others like O'Cassin, O'Giala, O'Mcginn are less common in the region. And then additionally, it had the Duggans, who were Ullavs or learned men of the Sogan and the Ammonia. And it's largely responsible to this family that we know many of the names and their associated territories in the region today. As I mentioned earlier, the territory kind of extended all the way across East Galway from the Clare River to the River Suck. But gradual encroachment by the Ammonia and the other surrounding tribes kind of pushed back the territory of Sogan. But the name is still, place names of the region are still very much associated with the family. So you've got Ballymacward, Minlaw, Ui Maine, and then Moyloch, Killiscobe, and Knockmoy were all in the later territory of Sogan. Now, like the O'Kellys, the Sogan were given to be descended from a northern tribe. In this case, it was Fikra Arid and his son Sogan Salbui from Dalnaradi, which is a territory kind of in modern day Antrim, basically. But what does the DNA tell us about this? Well, there are several different genetic groupings associated with Sogan. The largest group is in the Mannion project, and has a genetic associations with the Brún. Clearly plays an important part in the history of Sogan. But when we're trying to identify the original genetic signature of the clan, from which the surnames kind of emerged originally, we need to look at the intersection between the various names associated with the tribe. And for the Sogan, the two most prominent names in the region now are Mannion and Ward. Now the Mannions are generally recorded as chiefs of the territory of Sogan, but both they and the Wards are among the most active war bands of the Ammonia in the annals. And if we look at this haplogroup, so or BY 2695, we see a consolidated group of Mannions and a consolidated group of Wards sitting side by side. Now each surname group has a common ancestor around the dawn of the surname era, but the two groups then have a common ancestor between them of BY 2695, currently dated about 450 AD. But there are also other consolidated groups within this haplogroup, and the largest being the cranes. And what's the significance of this then? Well, the cranes are also a well-developed project and have several advanced DNA testers. But although many of them record their origin country as Ireland, the earliest known ancestor is invariably in the USA, so they don't really know where their ancestral origins are in Ireland, or who that earliest known ancestor was in Ireland. Now, this is a dilemma for these testers, and they can test as much as they want, but without testers back in Ireland, they'll never bridge that gap to identify their ancestral links in Ireland. But a group like this also present an incredible opportunity for Irish testers. But just by testing a few Irish testers, we can bridge that gap and unlock all these advanced YDNA results. Now, while we don't have an Irish origin location for all these cranes, we do have a closest non-crane match with an earliest known ancestor of Hugh Kelly from Woodmount in Roscommon within the territory of Ammonia. But then we need to look at where the main concentration of the crane surname is in Ireland. Well, if we look at Barry Griffin's surname distribution maps, which are based on the 1901-1911 census, we can see that there are very few cranes just dotted around, but there's a large concentration of alternative virtue in the name, which is Crehan in northeast Galway, right adjacent to where the Mannions and the Wards concentrations. Now, the Mannion name is particularly useful in this sense because the Mannion name is exclusively found concentrated in Galway. The wards appear to have concentrations in Donegal, Monaghan, Louth, but also in East Galway, as you'd expect. So are these Crehans the same as the Cranes that we were looking at? And if so, is this another surname associated with the Sogan? Obviously, we need to test some Crehans in this region in order to explore this properly. And then what about the origin story that said that the Sogan were descended from Fikra Arid, his son Sogan Salbui, of the Dalnaradi in Antrim? Dalnaradi was a kingdom in modern-day County Antrim. There's significant overlap, though, with the neighbouring kingdom of Dalriada, which spanned from North Antrim across the Hebrides to western Scotland. Now, although the sources show that them as two distinct kingdoms, there's similar names, territorial crossover, and links in their genealogies all suggest that they're quite closely tied. Dalriada had been credited with bringing the Gaelic language to Scotland in the 4th to 5th century, and over time it moved its centre over to Argyll in Scotland, ultimately becoming quite disconnected from Ireland itself. Dalnradi, on the other hand, remained centred in Antrim. But there was undoubtedly strong ties and strong interconnectivity among these tribes, and with those in the Hebrides and west coast of Scotland, particularly in an era when it was far easier and quicker to travel by water than it was by land. But is there anything in the DNA that suggests a connection between the Stogan and this region? This is a table of genetic descent based on information that's publicly available on Family Tree DNA's website. In the center, you can see the shaded box with branches of the Wards, Manions, Cranes, and Millers, all with a common ancestor, BY2695 in about 450 AD. All these groups are overwhelmingly Irish, as you can see. But if we zone out and look at the adjacent branches, we can see that all these adjacent branches are of mixed Irish and Scottish heritage. And if we triangulate back, as you can see using the blue arrows, we can say that the progenitor of this branch BY2724 is likely to have been on the frontier between Scotland and Ireland. And importantly, this common ancestor is estimated to date to approximately 200 AD, which is relatively consistent with the date for Fiacha Arid, who was alive in about 236 AD. However, the common ancestor for the Wards and Manions is downstream, so BY2695, and that's dated to 450 AD. But he's supposed to be the son of Fiacha Arid, Sogan Salbui. So is this out? Well, it was quite common for generations to be inserted and removed from the genealogies, and certainly would have been a lot easier to say Sogan Salbui, son of Fiacha Arid, rather than listing the 8 or 10 generations that went in between. So maybe these have been lost to time, but we obviously need to do more testing and need to make the connections between these groups and their ancestral origins in Ireland in order to better understand this. So if we map that, then map all those advanced testers below BY2724, we can see that there's certainly an early genetic link between the Wards, Manions of East Galway and the north coast of Ireland and into Scotland. So this is really promising haplogroup for exploration of the possible Stogan connection, given the intersection between the Manions and Wards and the earlier association with the frontier between Ireland and Scotland. So all these are convincing but not conclusive. So we need to recruit Irish testers in order to explore this effectively. The last example we'll look at then is the case of Sealanamca or South Emania. This was another regional kingdom within Greater Emania, which consisted of several tribes, including the Sealanamca themselves in Longford Barony. So basically, this territory extended from Clonfert along the Shannon down to Portumna, then up to Mulla and back to Clontuskert again, and that's basically the modern barony of Longford. And then the territory also extended into South Roscommon, so Winter Kinney, and Top McConnell or Moyfin, as well as extending into Offaly and taking in the parish of Lusmagh. Now, although there are many indications that the Madden Sealanamca were distinct from the core Emania or the O'Kellys, they were, along with many other tribes, written into the genealogies as has been descended from Máine Mór. So in the Book of Lecan and the Laura Oanya, Owen Finn, the ancestor of the Achilles, is recorded as the brother of Owen Buach, the ancestor of the Sealanamca or the Maddens. And in bardic poetry written to Owen O'Madden, the line of Moyfin in the 14th century, it's recorded that Sealanamca had contributed 7 kings to Greater Emania, including Gara, who the annals record took over as a king of Emania after Tig O'Kelly was killed at the Battle of Clontarf. Now there's a pedigree for the Sealanamca included in the pedigree of the Emania in John O'Donovan's Tribes and Customs of Imani. Here we see the earliest ancestor for the Sealanamca is Owen Buach, brother of Owen Finn, from whom the O'Kellys descend, as we said. After about 4 generations, the lineage splits into 2 lines under Covtuck, who ultimately gives rise to the O'Maddens. and his brother Inruktuk, whose lineage gave rise to the Coolans. Now the Maddens, who came to rule over the territory for much of its history, are quite well documented, but there are also several references, both in genealogical material and the annals, to Maculacan or the Coolahans as the ancient chiefs of Sri-Lanka. And indeed, O'Donovan states it explicitly here, so he states that Ulacan, the progenitor of the Maculahans, the ancient chieftains of Sri Lanka. Now, this was just before the Maddens came to dominate the kingship of Sri Lanka. But even after the Maddens came to dominate the chieftainship of Sri Lanka, the Coolahans clearly still had a place. Their name is stamped on Ballinasloe in Lusmagh parish, and there are other records, including this one in 1595, that record the Maddens and Coolahans fighting alongside one another against the Crown. So this is at the outset of the 9 Years' War, which culminated in the Battle of Kinsale and the Flight of the Earls. Basically, the Maddens had risen in rebellion. They'd been pushed back to a stronghold in Clachan Castle in Lusmagh, and in 1595 the castle was attacked by Crown forces. All those inside were killed. There's a list in the journal of Sir William Russell, Lord Deputy of Ireland at the time, which records all those killed in the siege of the castle. So at the top you can see Shane, Cahill, Donagh and Owen O'Madden, but immediately after them you've got Malachlan, Dove, McCoolahan. And other names then strongly associated with Demania as well are featured on the list. So we've got Shane McKeegan, Thomas Hannon, William Dolan, Murtagh Kenny. So you can see then the enduring connections between the tribes in the struggle against the Crown. But what does the DNA say about the relationship between the Maddens and the Coolahans? And does this help us in any way identify the core lineage of the Sri Lanka? While studying the Glennon's early origins, it became clear to me that the Sri Lanka played a crucial part in the history of Tamarconnell, where the Glennons originated. So I began looking at the Madden's DNA and saw that the largest group in the Madden DNA project was a consolidated group with one tester having origins in Galway and others with origins in Clare and Cork. But importantly, there were two Maddens who had done a Big Y advanced DNA test, so we knew exactly where this group sat on the DNA tree. Now, there are numerous other surnames listed as being members of the Sri Lanka, but only the Coolahans have a specific identifiable connection within the Maddens, with the Maddens in the genealogies, as we've already looked at. So about a year ago, I tracked down a Coolahan tester whose earliest known ancestor came from just outside Lawrencetown, which was originally called Balya Sri Lanka, after the territory in which it's found. Now you can see on the left the two lineages from O'Donovan's pedigree, with Unbuch at the top, his son Anamka, who died in 757, after whom the Sri Lanka are named, his son Dungo, and then Muldoon. And it's at this point that the two branches occur. So Muldoon had two sons, Kovtuk, who gave rise to the Maddens, and his brother Inruktuk gave rise to the Coolahans. And then on the right, you can see the results of the advanced Big Y test for the Coolahan tester from Lawrencetown and his relationship with the Madden group. And you can see it closely reflects the genealogy, with both groups sitting alongside one another and branching off at the time or just before the surname era. On the Coolahan side, then there's a Houlihan advanced match as well, and he matches at the very dawn of the lineage again. And they've got 8 private variants. That basically means that each of them are a distinct lineage from that point onward. After that first DNA marker, they both branch off. So that match with the Houlihan and Coolahan is basically at the dawn of the surname era, and then they immediately branch off after that. And that's significant because the Coolahans would have originally used the Irish name Maculacan, whereas the Houlahans would have used the name Ua instead of Mac, so Ulacan, and they used it and became Houlihan. So the two prefixes Mac and Ua, we know from other genetic lineages were often used interchangeably. And then on the Madden side, so that's slightly complicated. by the presence of a Hogan lineage, but in fact we know that there were Hogans in Sri at Ballyhogan, just outside Mulla, but that place name, according to Log Annam, dates to at least the late 14th century, and there are dozens more. There are a dozen more Madden's matches in the Madden project who match this group. So all you have to do is get a few more big wide testers, and we should be able to confirm which came first, the Maddens or the Hogans. But realistically, the chances of this Houlihan tester landing on this precise leaf of the human DNA tree along with the largest Madden grouping and matching a Houlihan himself at the dawn of the surname era, well, the chances are so remote that we can be relatively confident that this grouping were one of the lineages, if not the central lineage of the Sri Lanka. To summarise and conclude then, now this is a purely theoretical snip tree for the tribes adapted from Tiber Fair's chart that we looked at the start presentation with the addition of those haplogroups that we've discussed. As I previously noted in reference to the Kelly group, so the size, the diverse branching, the locations, the date estimates, and Count O'Kelly's pedigree all indicate that this is a core lineage of the Ammonia. But it's also been clear for quite some time that no other consolidated surname groups feature in the Kelly haplogroup. So the Ammonia were clearly were not a genetically homogeneous tribe. And as well as the proposed Sogan and Sri Lanka groups, there are other neighbouring haplogroups as well that feature surnames of Ammonia. So, for instance, if we take Morris Gleeson and Co.'s recent identification of 8259 as the Brune overarching haplogroup, then its neighbouring haplogroup BY198 is a close relative of the Brune, but it's not Brune, and this contains a consolidated group of Egans and Keegans, indicating that Clan MacEdagon sit within this haplogroup, and other Ammonia surnames like Morgan and Donlan also feature here. And even under the Brune haplogroup itself, we have the largest group of Mannion testers, along with Donlans, Egans, Kennys again. So there's a lot more research and testing to be done, but if these other haplogroups do indeed represent different tribes, it supports the idea that Ammonia was genetically diverse territory, and it's integrated several different tribes into one regional kingdom, sometimes termed a confederation. But the research also indicates that the genealogies are not entirely fabricated. So in fact, some of these surnames do appear to be related as described in the genealogy. So we've got the Mannions and the Wards, and we've got the Maddens and the Coolahans. However, the overarching genealogies that integrate all these groups into one pedigree of descent from Ammonia that's not accurate. But this makes Ammonia all the more interesting and impressive, that it was able to hold together all these diverse tribes and withstand, to a large extent, the pressure from other more homogeneous regional kingdoms like the O'Connors to the north and west. And indeed, the genealogies were likely an effort to make sense of this diverse tribal landscape and integrate the tribes into a coherent unit that could resist these other regional powers. In this session, I gave a brief introduction to Y-DNA and Tribes of Ammonia project. I presented some examples of how we can explore Y-DNA to better understand our ancestry. But before I link to the next part of the presentation, let me just say that DNA is just a tool for understanding the past. I've focused on three core lineages where the surnames intersect in this presentation, but there are going to be numerous auxiliary lineages among these surnames which can often offer just as much to our understanding of the history of the surnames and the tribes. And as we progress through the project, we'll explore the other tribes and these lineages and what the DNA says about their origins and history. But in part two of this talk, I'll zone in on a single regional surname group to explore how Y-DNA can be used to break through those kind of brick walls in the 1800s and probe the history of ancestors in the preceding centuries. In particular, I'll use the example of the Glennons to explore how the surname became distributed across Roscommon and Galway around the time of the Cromwellian transplantations in the mid-17th century. But obviously the research can't really make headway without new testers into the project. So if you're interested and you or a family tester have an earliest known paternal ancestor from the region, or who bears a surname associated with the region, then you can use the link on screen now to buy a Y-DNA test and join the project. Gura Mahagats. Thanks for watching.